Okay, everyone. Shabbat Shalom to all of you. Wherever you may be scattered across the four corners of the earth, we welcome you, O House of Israel, and welcome to the river. It's good to be back. For those of you who are watching online, you've probably noticed that I've not been here for a while, and so it's good to be back. If you are watching online after the fact, so to speak, and you do wish to come join us live and be part of what the Father is doing in the midst of this community, we'd love for you to come and join us. We meet every weekly Shabbat at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And if you wish to know how to do this, just go to riverbranchfellowship.com and scroll down a bit. And there'll be a link to sign up to our weekly newsletter, which when you click will bring up this little form, and just put your first and last name in and your email and hit subscribe. And that will put you on our weekly newsletter, which will contain the Zoom login details so that you can come and join us live in the proverbial flesh, so to speak. We'd love for you to come and say hi. Okay, love versus hurt, insights from early parenthood. For those of you who are watching who do not know, the reason I've been away for 6, maybe 7 weeks is that the Father has greatly blessed my wife and I, and we became parents and had our first child together. We have a precious son, for those of you who don't know. He was born in December, and we've named him Micaiah Samuel. And wow, what a journey it's been. What a journey it's been. I have felt every emotion at once. And it's just been a time where so many things that both my wife and I, things that we knew at maybe more of an intellectual, all of a sudden became living. And me being me, I think a lot, and I like to chew the cud a lot. And this time of early parenthood has made me chew the cud a lot. There's been a lot of things that have come into sharp focus, especially matters regarding the faith. Parenthood is one of the great shadow pictures that the Father has given us. We've been given the shadow picture of marriage, but parenthood and, a bride, a groom, and having children is another one of these great shadow pictures. And the Father has saw fit to bless my wife and I with the literal practical application of becoming parents. And so today's message is going to come from some of the insights that have come to the forefront of my chewing the cud and my time with the Father. But it's also going to be a continuation of actually probably the last 10 teachings that we've done. The last 10 or so teachings that we've done recently have really been a very practical look at the very essence of our faith. What does our faith actually look like? What is it that the Father is looking for from his people? The faith, the true faith is meant to change people. It's meant to become living. It's meant to bring forth fruit. And the Father gives us these shadow pictures of marriage and of becoming parents to teach us these great fundamental principles of the faith. And so today, I want to continue in the theme of the practical application of our faith, especially as how we are to be as a body. And these insights having come from these early stages of me becoming a parent. By no means am I now an expert on the issue. So I'm going to stick within my lane, so to speak, because I am a newbie parent. And so I'm going to stick to the insights that have been given to me in this early stage. But they will be very practical in regards to walking life and faith in this time domain. Before we jump into the meat of today's teaching, so to speak, I just want to go through a couple of scriptures to kind of set the scene for today. The invisible made visible. The Apostle Paul says this in Romans 1, verses 19 through to 20. For what can be known about Elohim is plain to them, because Elohim has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have clearly been perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made or created. So they are without excuse. You know, what the Apostle Paul is saying is that the creation is actually demonstrating to us the eternal principles. We are without excuse, especially us, those that will claim the faith. If we have eyes to see and ears to hear, can we actually see and hear what has actually been plainly revealed to us in the very creation? You know, Curtis's last teaching regarding the trees of the Bible have been in this vein, that these trees give us shadow pictures. The very creation itself that Elohim has created, he is using to teach us these eternal principles. And so that which is eternal, that which is invisible, so to speak, has been clearly demonstrated to us in a way that if we have eyes to see and ears to hear, we should be able to hear and see these things. The only thing that would prevent us from actually seeing this is if our eyes have scales on them and we've got too much proverbial cotton wool in our ears to prevent us from hearing. You know, hurt, EAD, leaven. These are the things that blind us and deafen us from what Elohim is trying to teach us through his creation. And so today's message has been an exercise in this, definitely for my wife and I, that things that we understood maybe at the intellectual level have now become very living and come into sharp focus through the shadow picture of being given a child. The Apostle Paul also says this in 1 Corinthians 2, verses 6 through to 7. The question is that I would ask is, why is Elohim showing us these things? It's one thing that he is and that there are things he wants us to learn. But the question is, what's the purpose of us knowing these things? Is it so that we can just sit on our laurels and go, I know all this stuff, and puff ourselves up? In 1 Corinthians 2, the Apostle Paul says this, yet among the mature, we do impart wisdom, although it is not a wisdom of this age or of the rulers of this age who are doomed to pass away. But we impart a secret and hidden wisdom of Elohim, which Elohim decreed before the ages for our glory. The things that Yah is trying to teach us through his creation, yes, they have a very practical application as to how we go through life in the time domain, but that's not its ultimate purpose. The purpose is that as we grow and mature in the faith, because Paul's making this statement that wisdom comes with maturity. You know, when we come into the faith as children and as babes in the faith, we may learn a lot of knowledge, okay? And there is a place for knowledge. But as we grow and mature, we need to, that knowledge needs to turn into wisdom. The application of said knowledge, especially in a fallen, broken world. But that this wisdom, while it may bless us now, and it absolutely does bless us now in this time domain, its ultimate purpose is for the age to come. And Paul goes as far as saying that this is for our glory. When is it that his people will be lifted up in a state of glory? It is in the resurrection, and namely in the millennial reign. His people will be resurrected, and a bride will be selected to help our king rule and govern the earth. And so this wisdom is for the age to come, for when we are given our glorified bodies. And when do we learn this wisdom? Well, the time is now. This is a part of the reason for our test in this very time domain, that it's not just about amassing knowledge. It's about that knowledge becoming wisdom so that we can become vessels of honor in the age to come. Okay? And, Curtis and I, we say these things all the time. And with me becoming a parent now, these words have been ringing in my ears. What is it that the Father is trying to show me now through this shadow picture of parenthood? And how is this going to become wisdom for the age to come, in the hope that I may be found a useful vessel in the age to come? And so this is where I want to share from. 1 John 3, verses 1 through to 2. See what kind of love the Father has given to us, that we should be called children of Elohim. And so we are. And so right now, I believe that being children of Elohim is essentially, this is where we're at now. We're in this time domain. We're in a fallen state, and we are learning what it is that Elohim is truly looking for. He wants his people to grow and to mature in the wisdom that we mentioned in the previous passage, so that that wisdom can be used in the age to come. Hopefully, our time in the time domain is a time where we go from being children of Elohim to actually being mature. And as the Apostle Paul would say, that it's with the mature that this wisdom for the age to come is given and made clear. Okay? The reason why the world does not know us is that it did not know him. Beloved, we are Elohim's children now, and what we will be has not yet appeared. But we know that when he appears, we shall be like him, because we shall see him as he is. Now, let me ask an almost redundant question. Is Elohim a child? No. He is our Father, right? He is perfectly mature, perfectly whole, perfectly complete. And so I believe encapsulated in this statement is essentially echoing what the Apostle Paul was saying, that right now we may be children, but there's a time coming we shall see him as he is, Father, bridegroom. There will be this maturing that goes on. And how do we mature? Well, we have to first gain knowledge, and that knowledge, as we grow and mature, then has to become into wisdom. Okay? Now, here's the thing. We've been given this shadow picture of parents, a bride, a groom, children. This is a shadow picture given to us to help us understand eternal principles. Now, if the very shadow picture that we've been given becomes broken in our lives, that means that the very thing that's there to teach us what Elohim wants us to know will become skewed, okay? Many of us may have experienced troubled and broken childhoods, okay? And the very shadow picture that was given to us to help us understand what Elohim is, well, not all of us grew up in a good shadow picture, so to speak. These shadow pictures speak to Elohim when they're in their proper order, in the biblical design. The problem is that many of us did not have a shadow picture and a witness given to us that was in the biblical order. And many more of us may have had a somewhat faith-based experience of these shadow pictures, but Mystery Babylon has come in and muddied the waters. And then secular wisdom has come in and muddied the waters even more. And so the very shadow pictures of marriage, parenthood have been muddied by the enemy. And this is why the enemy, I believe, has specifically gone and targeted the family nucleus. Attack marriage. So now your understanding of a bride and groom is completely skewed. Bring hurt and division into the children so that when they grow up and become parents themselves, their witness now becomes skewed. This is why the enemy has specifically targeted the family nucleus. Take out the family nucleus, you can bring down nations and kingdoms. And this is what the enemy is doing. He's trying to bring down the house of Israel by attacking the family nucleus. And this is why Curtis and I very often and almost ad nauseum speak about biblical design, parenthood, marriage. What is the biblical design and order of things in a faith-based environment? And so even people that may have not experienced a broken marriage or a broken childhood will have then had Mystery Babylon come into their lives and muddy the waters. And now we've got secular wisdom coming in, so-called wisdom, and now throw in AI on the fire. It's a bit of a mess. And here we are trying to unlearn all these things so that we no longer remain children, but that we grow and mature. Because as the apostle would say, it's children that get tossed around by every wind of doctrine and teaching. The Apostle John continues in the next chapter, in verses 16 and 17. So we have come to know and to believe the love that Elohim has for us. Elohim is love, and whoever abides in love abides in Elohim, and Elohim abides in him. In the proper order of things and in a proper biblical shadow picture, where is the first place that you are supposed to learn love? It's in the family. We all came into the time domain as children, as babes, and we all had earthly parents. And our earthly parents were supposed to be a witness of what love is, as a shadow picture of the love that Elohim has for us. Because remember, we are children of Elohim here and now in this time domain. Here's the problem. If that shadow picture has been completely upended and muddied and broken, how are we supposed to learn the love of Elohim? Because if we come from, those of you that have come from broken family backgrounds will understand that understanding the love of Elohim has been hindered because of the witness you've been given. By this, love is perfected with us, so that we may have confidence for the day of judgment, because as he is, so also we are in this world. The Apostle John is literally saying that understanding and knowing what biblical love is actually part of our bridal garment preparation. And so what will be the things that prevent us from giving and receiving love? Again, why is the enemy attacking the family nucleus so hard? Because this is the earliest stage while we are in the time domain that we're supposed to have a witness of what love is. And if understanding what love is and love being perfected is part of our bridal garments, do you see why the enemy would go and attack the family nucleus? What will prevent us from growing in the love of Elohim and thus experiencing bridal garment preparation? Hence the teaching title today, Love versus Hurt. If we have hurt and pain in our lives, it's actually that undealt with will actually prevent us from preparing our garments and understanding the love of Elohim, and it will keep us in a childlike state. And last time I checked, Elohim is not marrying a child bride. And so this is why it's important. This is why it's so important. You know, as I was pondering putting today's teaching together, I was throwing around a few titles in my head. So the teaching is called Love versus Hurt. But here are some of the possible contenders that were part of the mix. Love versus EAD. Another one was Love versus Leaven. I like that one. It's got a nice alliteration to it. It's got a nice ring to it. Another one was Love versus Religion. But what I understood as I was putting these titles, throwing the title around in my head, is that all of these actually generate hurt. EAD is the outcome of being hurt. Emotionally arrested development is what EAD stands for. When we experience certain hurts and traumas, it can actually stunt our growth in certain aspects of our lives. Leaven, undealt with leaven, will eventually hurt, whether it be the individual or those around the individual that's entertaining the leaven. My experience is usually both. It will hurt both parties, the person entertaining the leaven and those around the person entertaining the leaven. And when everybody's carrying and bringing their leaven to the party, everyone's going to get hurt. Religion. Many of you have been hurt by religion. Religion is the primary source of atheism because religion has hurt people. All these things will prevent us from learning what the love of Elohim is. I know this because I'm going to speak from a bit of my testimony today, from my time in the time domain. Overcoming leads to love being perfected. We have to overcome hurt. We have to... One of the most difficult things in overcoming hurt in our lives is that sometimes we may have actually been dealt an unfair set of cards, so to speak. But one of the hardest things, despite us having been dealt an unfair set of cards, is what part did we play in contributing to the mess of our lives? That is one of the hardest things I have had to do in my life. I was dealt some pretty unfair cards in my life, and I will share a couple of them today. But I had my part to play in adding to it. I didn't deal with my set of cards as well as I should have or could have. But overcoming these things, religion, leaven, EAD, the hurt in our lives, being able to grow past it, will lead to love being perfected. In fact, it will teach us what forgiveness truly means. And so that's the foundation I want to go for, to come from in regards to today's teaching. There was a question that was asked to me while I was away by two people. They asked me the same question in slightly different words. One of these people was my bride, who understands and knows my testimony, my past life. Another one with a servant leader in the body right now, a leader in this community, and he doesn't know all of my testimony. And I just found it really interesting that both these two people would ask me the same question as a new parent. And the question goes something like this: how has becoming a father been affected by your previous example of an earthly father? That was essentially the essence of the question that both my bride and this servant leader in our community asked me. Now, this servant leader is a father himself of several children. And he was just asking me, and my wife was asking me, now that you are a parent, now that you have a son, how has this been affected or shaped by your earthly fathers? And it's interesting because both these people asked me that question within the same week. And in the days leading up to this question being asked to me, I was naturally already in this space. I was already in a place where I was, looking at my son and then thinking about my experience of being a child and the examples that were given to me by my earthly fathers. And so it became a confirmation of this is what I would be speaking on and sharing with the body when I came back. And so I want to take the community on a bit of a journey into this very question, at least how it applies from my experience in the time domain. And so I'm going to share again from my testimony of overcoming certain things in my life. And again, keeping in this spirit of the practical application of our faith. And so the starting point, where did this all begin? As I said, the Father has blessed my wife and I with the gift of a beautiful baby boy who was born in December. And when my son was born, my life and my heart were changed in an instant. It was, I had these consecutive moments of hearing his cry. When I heard that cry, something happened within me. I can't explain it. Parents, I now understand why parents say your life will be changed in an instant. Treasure the moment. Like I understood it intellectually. Now I know it. I heard his cry. Then I got to hold him. Well, no, then I saw him. And then I got to hold him. And these three little moments in very short succession, something happened. Like I felt it instantly. It was almost like I experienced another level of heart circumcision there and then in the moment. Something happened. My outlook on life changed. Something awoke inside of me that I had a rough idea was there, and I knew that I understood again intellectually that something would happen within me, but then it happened and I was like, whoa. And nothing could have prepared me for that. Even knowing that it was going to happen didn't prepare me for the reality of what this feels like. And so what happened and awakened within me? Many things, but I want to focus on one particular aspect, and what awoke within me was paternal love. I finally understood within one moment, just like that, what the love of a father was. It was life-changing, absolutely life-changing. And then the days and the weeks following the birth of my son, that the love of a father, that paternal, parental love grew, matured. And look, I know, right off the bat, I know it's still in its quote unquote infancy, right? My son is only 5 odd weeks old. But I knew paternal love rather than just understanding it. And a side of me awoke that I've not seen before. A side that my wife really appreciates, actually. And so that paternal bond, like flesh of my flesh, that this came forth from my wife and I. Yes, I won't dwell on that part too much. Parents, I now know what you mean when you spoke to me on these things. And it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. Now, as part of this paternal love and instant connection that I felt with my son, there were two questions that came up in my spirit as I was holding my son. The birth had happened, and, my wife and I sitting there, we're sitting, holding our son, we're collecting our thoughts, because everything kind of it's all a bit of a blur. It goes at 1,000,000 miles an hour. But there were two main questions that came up in my spirit. And these came up really because of the experience I had as a child. The first question that came up was, as I was looking and holding my son, I remember thinking, why would anyone want to hurt a child? Why would, especially a newborn or like a baby, how bad do things have to be in someone's life, and how broken does one have to be to bring about harm to something that is so helpless and 100% dependent upon you? Very quickly, my wife and I realized, we know intellectually babies are 100% dependent, but when you actually live it, you really realize that. And it's actually very humbling, and it brings about a huge sense of responsibility. I remember having this moment going, right, Michael, you best buck up whatever ideas you think you've got going on, because you're now a father. You need to be the best human being possible for the sake of this little one. I actually got a really interesting insight to when Yeshua was praying the prayer in John 15 through to 17, as he's about to pay the price for the plan of redemption. And he says in his prayer that he set himself apart for his disciples. And I always understood that statement from a bridal sense, but I never understood it from a parental sense, because I had this moment of, wow, I need to buck my ideas up. I'm now a parent. And it hit me. I set myself apart for you. And so while there is a bridal element to that verse, I also believe there's a really big parental one. And I actually believe that's what Yeshua was coming from when he said that, because he just raised his disciples to a particular point, had he not? And he's about to go pay the price for the plan of redemption, and then he's about to send them off. Right? He'd brought them up as discipleship children, if I may. And they'd gotten to a point, and Yeshua had set himself apart for them. And so that was a really interesting nugget I got. But I remember thinking, back to my first question, how bad has it got to be for someone to bring harm to one of these little ones? I really understand why Yeshua would say, woe to those that would make the spiritual little ones stumble. Remember that the physical points to the weightier matter. It's in that moment that I realized what a man is capable of if someone brings harm their way into their family. And so that was one question. The other question was, how bad and broken do things have to be that you would desert or leave one of these little ones? Now, I have to let me throw a caveat in that. Here's what I'm not speaking about when I ask that question. Unfortunately, in this time domain, things are so bad. Look, let me give a hypothetical example. Some of you may have experienced, say, adultery in a marriage, okay? And for whatever reason, things didn't pan out well. You had to experience divorce. And for whatever reason, let's say hypothetically that your spouse that committed adultery on you somehow ended up with custody of the children. That's not what I'm speaking about. In those cases, man, now I understand how brutal that would be, being a father myself. I'm not speaking about that. What I'm speaking of is when a father or a mother leaves their child for quote unquote no good reason. I hope that makes sense. I'm not speaking about the complications of adultery or, abuse, none of those things. I'm speaking about a parent leaving their child with no quote unquote good reason. And the reason I say that is because I experienced this as a child. And I'll get into that. And so these were the two questions that came about as I'm holding my son. How bad do things have to be to bring harm to one of these little ones? And why would someone desert their little one for no good reason? Because I had this paternal bond. All of a sudden, this love, this connection, like this, something I've never experienced awoke inside of me. And I remember thinking, if a marriage and family is in its biblical order, there should be no reason for those things. Yet we live in a world where these things do occur. Why? And so, as I'm holding this, it made me look back on my earthly examples. Again, think of the question, how has becoming a father been affected by the examples given to you by your earthly father? Now, I was given two examples. I had a paternal father and a stepfather. Now, my paternal father left when I was 3 years old. My mother and paternal father divorced when I was 3. And I saw him once more after that event when I was 4 years old. And that's the last I saw of him. Okay. It just is. It just is. Besides photos, so I do have photos of my paternal father. I have 2 memories of him, 2 actual physical memories. Again, I was extremely young, as you can see, but I do have 2 memories of him. One of them was while my parents were still together. And I remember that I'd vomited in my bed and I was in distress. And I remember going to my parents' room and, I'm a crying child. Everything's going wrong. I've got vomit all down me. Think of the shadow picture, by the way. I've got vomit all down me. And my mother instantly went to the place of love. My paternal father, on the other hand, proceeded to scold me verbally and kind of negate me. And I remember him having a go at my mum, saying, no. Memory number 1, as you can imagine, it's not the best of memories to have of your paternal father. The second memory I have of him was actually the last time I saw him. So this would have been after the divorce, which I don't remember the divorce, by the way, because of how young I was. But it was him visiting in the apartment that we used to live in at the time. And I don't remember that's it, basically. I just remember being sat on the sofa with him and my mum being in the room. They're the only 2 memories I have of him. And so again, the question is, I've thought this question over the years and it came really into fruition with the birth of my son. Why would my father leave? Because I now know how I felt. I now know what I feel towards my son. And for me, the idea of leaving is unfathomable. If that makes, again, for no good reason. Let's leave aside the complications of adultery, abuse, those types of things, that whole separate issue there. When I got older and I was, able to understand things a bit better, my mum actually told me what life with him was like with my father. Turns out it wasn't great. He was physically abusive to my mum. He gaslighted her quite a bit, very emotionally manipulative, like really odd behavior that manipulative on the emotional level and physically and emotionally and verbally abusive towards her. And that obviously trickled down to me in that first memory I have of him when, I'm just a young toddler that's in need of being cleaned up. And I was just met with behavior that wasn't good. It wasn't good. And so in essence, my father was broken. I was also told as I got older what life for my father was like when he was a child. You know, my mum told me about this. My grandmother told me about this. For those of you who don't know, my father is a Serb. He's from Serbia. And my mother was raised in Croatia. Now, just as a little bit of historical context, former Yugoslavia, right? You'll know that in Eastern Europe, there used to be this collection of countries under the banner of a communist state called Yugoslavia. And for those of you who don't know, towards the end of the communist state of Yugoslavia, there was a brutal, brutal war that broke out as Yugoslavian state collapsed. And so you had multiple different ethnicities and countries within this state of Yugoslavia, like Croatia, Macedonia, Serbia, Montenegro, all, you know, Bosnia would come out of the breakdown of Yugoslavia. And the war there was absolutely brutal. Just to put it into perspective, genocides happened in this war. And the war happened basically because of nationalism, a touch of religion, and politics. It was actually, it was racist at its core, you know, because of the extreme nationalist and political ideology that was being brought forth. And so that generated genocide. Just to put it into perspective, the Serbs and the Croats were mortal enemies during this stage, or some portions of them. I'm painting broad brushstrokes. To give an example that the Americans may understand, it would be my mum and father getting together would be the equivalent of a Native American and a colonial American getting together during early American times. That's what we're talking about here. Two polar opposite camps coming together, okay? And so that's one aspect. This is the generation that my father came from. Secondly, his parents abandoned him and gave him up to his grandparents, and his parents, things were so bad for my paternal father, like he would have been tied up by his parents and beaten with a stick when he was a young lad, okay? That's the background that my paternal father came from. Just to give you an understanding. So he comes from a war-torn generation, which we're still seeing the fruit of now, by the way, in Eastern Europe. And his parents abandoned him, beat him with a stick, and from what I'm told, his grandparents were very emotionally distant because of the Yugoslavian war. If I'm not mistaken, my father's father actually served, well, there was no choice. If you were a man, you fought. And like I said, it was brutal, brutal. And so here's what I realized. My father couldn't love. My father, what I experienced with my son, my father couldn't have experienced with me. I felt this deep emotional paternal bond. It was instant. And because of that paternal bond, I could never leave or hurt my child now. It's unfathomable to me. So how could my paternal father indirectly hurt me and abandon me? Because there was no good reason for my father to leave, okay? There wasn't adultery going on. My mum was faithful. There wasn't any of those things in the picture. He left. And I realized that either he didn't feel that paternal bond, or he was just broken, that broken. And so why couldn't my father love? Because of what he experienced. I mean, what kind of example was he given? His parents beat him with a stick while tied up, and his grandparents were completely broken from a brutal war in Yugoslavia, what was former Yugoslavia. He was simply a product of his environment. He'd not been given an example of biblical love. He had no love in his life, so how could he show it unto others? Again, his family nucleus was completely destroyed. Therefore, he didn't experience the parental discipleship that was required for him to then be able to pass that on to his son, i.e. me. The question then becomes, if that was the example I was given, and we'll get to example number 2, why is it that I'm different? We'll get to that. The evidence of love, this is we're given this by the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient, is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not boast, is not puffed up. Love does not behave indecently, does not seek its own. My paternal father left. Why? I've actually come to the understanding that my father couldn't love, and he couldn't, because he was so emotionally broken and stunted on the emotional level, he couldn't actually connect. It was one of the things that my grandmother said about him. She said, Michael, your father couldn't connect on an emotional level with anybody. It was and as a result of that, all he's left with is self. Why would he leave my mother and me? Because we did nothing wrong. He was seeking, all he was left with was self. And remember, this description of love, this is the love that John, the Apostle John, says that this is the love we are supposed to have come to know, and that this love being perfected is part of our bridal garment preparation. Love is not provoked, reckons not the evil, does not rejoice over the unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth. It covers all. Love covers a multitude of transgressions, does it not? It believes all. It expects or hopes all. It endures all. Love never fails. Love never fails. That's an absolute statement. Love never fails. And so with my paternal father, why did his marriage fail? And why did his fatherhood fail? Biblically, the only thing I can come to is that biblical love was not in the picture. Because if biblical love was in the picture, it would have covered all transgressions. It would have believed that things would have panned out. It would have expected and hoped for all things. It would have endured, and it wouldn't have failed. Faith, because love will believe and hope for all things. So love, faith, and overcoming, love will endure all things, are intrinsically tied together. Love, faith, and overcoming are intrinsically tied together. And as we saw from the foundational scriptures of today's teaching, understanding love and love being perfected is part of giving us boldness and confidence in the day of judgment. If these qualities are not evident, if the fruit of love, these qualities are not evident in a given scenario, there is no biblical love in the picture, or it's lacking a lot. Okay? And I don't want to say that love, in black and white terms, that either there is love or there isn't. The question is which will win out? Think of it as a sliding scale. Which will win out? Self, hurt, or love? Unfortunately, the example given to me by my paternal father, hurt won out over love. In fact, I can say this fairly confidently, there was no love given to me by my paternal father and to my mother. Why? Because of everything that he went through and the example that was given to him. So while there is an accountability on him, he didn't overcome. Am I mad? No. I feel pity for him. He's a product of his environment. Okay, my stepfather. So obviously my paternal father is out of the picture. I moved to the UK in August 1996 when I was 8.5 years old. Okay. By this stage, my mum and stepfather were engaged, and they would marry very shortly after we moved to the UK. And this individual would become my brother and sister's dad. Here's the thing. Life was actually good at first. The first few years were actually brilliant. Brilliant. I actually believe it was quite healing at points. Here's the thing though, roughly 3 years later, so we're talking around 1999, the cracks in my stepfather started to really show. Cracks in his character, cracks like the veneer, the mask that was put on, things would start to break through every now and then. And it really started coming to a head when I hit puberty. And it was around the time I hit puberty that my brother was born. And then a year after my brother was born, my sister would be born. And so from my stepfather's point of view, he's adopted me as his son. I'm now starting to become a bit of a handful. Okay, I was a big handful to contend with when I hit puberty. But then he's got the added stress, if you want to call it that, of becoming a father himself. For context, though, this was his second marriage, okay? His second marriage. For both my mum and him. And so around that time, things started to really go out of hand because, well, teenagers, what do teenagers do? They push boundaries, right? They push boundaries. And yeah, I caused problems, shall we say. I'm going to give an incident that happened. My sister was not born at this time. So, and my brother would have been 9 months old. So I would have been, I don't know what, 10, 11, nearly 11 years old. And I remember it was my mum, my stepfather, me, and my brother in the car seat in the back. We were driving to go visit my auntie and uncle. And it was an hour journey. Anyway, my brother, being 9 months old, started crying. Perfectly normal. Toddlers, young babies cry. They need stuff. They cry very loudly, right? You know when they can shrill and it really goes through your ears. My brother was doing that. Something that we noticed about my stepfather is that he couldn't handle a baby crying. It did something to him that I can't explain. And I remember we're in the car and my stepfather's going, he needs to quieten down. He's not got anything to cry about. If he's going to cry, I'm going to give him something to cry about, right? That was my stepfather's mentality. And I remember my mum being like, he's just a child. He's just a baby. It's the only way he can communicate. But anyway, long story short, my stepfather pulls the car over, turns around and slaps my brother in the face. 9 months old. 9 months old. And I remember being in the back, like, man, I was petrified at this naturally. But I remember in that moment going, geez, this is so wrong. He's 9 months old. Like, what the hell? What the hell? And now, why would my stepfather do that? I believe it was because he didn't know how to handle these things, his own brokenness. We'll get to that. But how could you do that to, like, we're not talking discipline here. The mentality was he's got nothing to cry about. If he's going to cry, he needs something to cry about. And his way of interpreting that was discipline, extremely heavy-handed discipline, which it makes no sense, but that's the broken world we live in. That's how broken he was. And so it was a weird dynamic because for the first 3 years, like I said, life was beautiful. And then, boom, things just started to take a hit. How do you think that looked to me at 11 years old? Do you think that built up my confidence in my father or my stepfather or brought it down? He had this inability to admit when he was wrong or made mistakes. I remember one time I got disciplined, and disciplined with him was heavy-handed in the literal sense, right? In the physical sense. And I remember I'd literally done nothing wrong, and it came out that I'd done nothing wrong, and he still wouldn't admit it. And I got heavy-handed discipline again for coming against him. I'm your father, deal with it. So I got 2 rounds of a beating. What do you think that made me think of him? Okay. Heavy-handed discipline not coming from love. When I got disciplined, I got a beating. Now let me caveat that I wasn't beaten black and blue, okay? And it wasn't like this was happening every day, but it was getting very frequent. Very frequent. And when I say heavy-handed, it was bang out of order. I'm fine with, discipline. And there are times when I got a spanking and I deserved it. Here's the thing. Because I was in that going into early teenagehood, I started to be able to gain a sense of discernment. And I knew when discipline was legitimate and when it wasn't. I didn't mind it when discipline was legitimate. But when I knew it wasn't, oh boy, did the resentment build up in me. Oh, did it build up? The anger, the resentment. What's the point? The futility of it, right? Hebrews 12, 5-8. Have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of Yah, nor be weary when reproved by him. For Yah disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. Again, discipline is part of the picture. There has to be a place where in the shadow picture, parents have to be able to discipline their children. Unfortunately, the world is so broken now that the state is literally usurping the parents and being able to chastise and discipline their children. And we see the fruit of that. And so I'm not against discipline. In fact, like I said, even as a teenager, I knew when I did wrong, and I didn't enjoy discipline that I deserved, but I knew I deserved it. It's when I didn't. It is for discipline that you have to endure. Elohim is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline in which you have all participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Here's the question. What if someone's been burnt by their earthly fathers and given discipline? I was. Let's keep going. Besides this, we had earthly fathers who disciplined us and we respected them. That's if discipline is coming from a place of love. Hebrews has just said that the reason for discipline is that it comes from a place of love, not from a place of self or being wronged. Remember, love is not provoked. It reckons not the evil. My stepfather, that's where the discipline came from. You've wronged me. You've provoked me. Therefore, I'm going to wallop you. And so here's the thing. I very quickly lost respect for my stepfather. This shadow picture was being robbed from me. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time as seems best to them. But he disciplines us for our good, that we may share his set apartness. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. This statement of the peaceful fruit of righteousness only comes about if discipline is coming from a healthy biblical place, from a place of love. And so, I look at my son, and because of this love and this connection I have for him, I'm actually dreading the day that I have to discipline him as he gets older. Like the thought of it, and I actually think that's healthy. Because if I do, it means that it's coming from the right place. It's coming from a place of love. I'm doing it for his good, that he can be a functional human being. But I'm not going to enjoy it. When my stepfather gave me discipline, it didn't bother him. In fact, he felt vindicated in doing it, and I saw it. If we are so burnt by unbiblical discipline, whether it come from our fathers or parents, or even from leaders in the body that discipline in an unbiblical fashion, how will we react when we receive true biblical discipline? I'll tell you now, you won't react well. How do I know? Because I lived what unbiblical discipline looks like. And yeah, it screwed me up for a while. Here's the thing. If we are unable to receive biblical discipline, how will we ever receive the peaceful fruit of righteousness in our lives? Do you see? Again, why is the enemy attacking the family nucleus so much? And think of what Mystery Babylon does. It focuses on the outside of the tomb, and it never deals with the actual heart of the issue. People don't overcome their pains. And so now the EAD, the hurt, just passes on down to the generations. Going back to my stepfather. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the master. Discipline must be given in love. Children are more perceptive and discerning than we give them credit for. I was a rebellious teenager. I was a nightmare teenager, wonderful as a child, but I hit my teens, boom. But even then, I knew when I deserved discipline and when I didn't. I experienced being provoked to anger, and it didn't do me a lot of good. But why was I provoked to anger? Because I could see through what was going on. I was more perceptive than may have been given me credit for. And when I did bring it up, let's just say I only brought it up the once because of what came after. This is echoed in Colossians. Fathers, do not provoke your children lest they become discouraged. And I was brought to this place. Not only was I angry, but because I started to see through the hypocrisy and the anger was building up in me, I became discouraged. And I got to this place of why bother? A child or teenager that has been brought to a place of why bother risks going down a very destructive path. Hear me on this. I was that child and teenager. I went down a very destructive path because of these statements. I take full accountability now that I played my part. Going back to the analogy, I was dealt maybe an unfair set of cards in that my father figures were so broken that they passed on their hurt to me. That's not fair. But I take full accountability for how I dealt with it. And I did not deal with it well. I can play the victim all I want. It's not going to help me overcome. I got brought to a place of why bother? And what that meant is that I actually got to a place of, well, it doesn't matter what I do. I'm just going to get walloped anyway. I may as well do whatever I want, because whether I do what I want or what he wants, I'm just going to get beaten. Doesn't matter. I'll get beaten. My mum gets beaten. And so I actually got to this place of it doesn't matter. I would do things as a teenager rebelling, knowing that I'd be getting a beating later on that day. And I was actually like, that's the place I got to. And the fruit of that would play out in me throwing my life down the toilet for the next few years. If you want to hear more of my testimony, I give it in other teachings. Fathers, hear me. Discipline needs to come from love. You don't want your children doing what I did as a teenager. You don't. Going back to my stepfather, beatings for both my mum and I becoming more frequent, especially for me when I pushed back as a rebellious teenager. Like I said, I was dealt maybe an unfair set of cards, but I have to take full accountability for what my part that I played in it. I would do things. I got so spiteful, angry, and resentful, and why bother, that I would even do things just to purposely expose him, in the sense of I would do something knowing it would expose his hypocrisy, knowing it would bring a beating down on me. And I would use that as a way of justifying my own stupid, delinquent actions. He was hurting me, I was being hurt, and I was returning the hurt that I was being hurt with and giving it back to him. Who do you think suffered as a result of that? My mum became collateral damage. My brother became collateral damage. My sister became collateral damage because they're now witnessing stuff that they shouldn't be witnessing. Oh, it was messy. It was messy. And again, I was looking at my son and going, how could you do that? The religious facade. For those of you who don't know, I was brought up in Adventism. You have heard me say, in the past when, we can put on the Shabbat Shalom face, this appearance. In Adventism, it's the happy Sabbath face, right? They don't say Shabbat Shalom, they say happy Sabbath. Oh man, when we would go to church on Saturdays, man, it looked good. Oh, it looked real good. Because I was very knowledgeable in the Bible, actually, as a kid, extremely knowledgeable in the Bible, in terms of the information that's within it, not in terms of discernment and understanding, but just knowing what was there. Oh, we looked good. I was talented musically. My stepfather was talented musically. He would even play the organ for the hymns in the church. He was even given little sermonettes, we look good. But behind the happy Sabbath face, it was a facade. All this stuff is going on. I started to understand why his first marriage failed. I'm like, because again, as I was gotten older, essentially what we experienced is exactly what happened in his first marriage. And that first marriage was in the Adventist church as well. And so I'm starting to go, hang on a minute. You claim to be this wonderful man of God, yet you can't see all the stuff that's going on in your own home. And if you can see it, you're avoiding it. And why are you avoiding it? Does being right really matter that much to you? Again, I take accountability for my part that I played in this. I played a part. The more his hypocrisy showed, the more I rebelled. And so it became, like I said, this vicious circle. Hypocrisy, beating my way, I become resentful, I become angry, I start to grow hatred. I actually lost utter respect for him. I didn't respect him anymore. And so then I would rebel knowing that it would cause him grief. And I was like, good. I actually got quite vindictive at points. However, like my paternal father, my stepfather had a history of his own as a child. He had his own history. So this is not just to beat down on him. He was broken too. My stepfather watched his paternal father die in front of his eyes of a brain aneurysm. They were in the car together, and his dad literally had a brain aneurysm in front of him. He was 8 years old. I can't imagine that did him a lot of good. His mother was left as a single mum for a while, and she was, my father was a boomer, part of the boomer generation. My stepfather was part of the boomer generation. And so it meant that his mum she was the World War II generation that experienced World War II as an adult. And so there's a lot of cultural issues within the UK that go on in that time. But her way of disciplining my stepfather would be to lock him in a cupboard and leave him for hours on end when he would play up. Again, I can't imagine that did him a lot of good. And he experienced the whitewash religious side of it as well. I know he did. And so again, how could you do these things to a child unless there's brokenness, there's hurt, there's all these things going on? And behavior like that is learnt. That was the example he was given. Well, of course he'd pass it on. Like my paternal father, my stepfather was a product of his environment. Do I care that that is my father's and stepfather's background? Do I actually care enough? And so back to my two questions. What were my two questions? Why would you hurt something or someone that is completely dependent upon you? Someone that doesn't know better, that's so not weak, but do you know what I mean? Completely dependent. And why would you abandon that for no good reason? The answer is really simple. Hurt people hurt people. I'm not condoning what my father figures did, but I care enough to know that they're a product of their environments. I actually don't feel any hatred towards them. In fact, I actually remember forgiving my stepfather very early. I was 18 when I forgave him. I left home at 16 because of how bad things were. By age 18, I got to a place where I could forgive him. Genuinely, I forgave him to his face. And I knew I'd forgiven him because when I saw him, there was no animosity, nothing. I actually felt pity. Anyway, but the answer is simple. Hurt people hurt people. In its simple form. Both my father figures never experienced true biblical parental love. They experienced... Look, were there moments of biblical love? Yeah, probably. And again, I look back to the first 3 years of being under my stepfather. Like I said, it was great. It was actually great. But it's only when it got tested, shall we say, that it was found wanting. And so it's not that it was completely absent of love, but again, this sliding scale, hurt versus love. Well, hurt won out. And it won out in their lives and it won out in mine. The hurt. Remember what the Apostle Paul says about love. Love never fails. So why did these things fail? Again, this is why the enemy is attacking the family nucleus and he's polluting the religious world. When they were hurting, their own hurt parents hurt them. This pattern actually going back generation after generation. I asked my grandmother what things were like for my father, and they look going back the generations, especially on like my mum's side and my father's side, my paternal father's side. And because of the Yugoslavian war and that area of the world being generally war-torn, man, like every generation back like 5 or 6 generation was completely screwed up. It was a pattern. Dare I say it, it was a generational curse, right? We read about generational curses, but again, that's an understanding that's been heavily polluted, especially by the more charismatic side of Christianity. The simplicity of a generational curse is that hurt people don't deal with their own hurt and then go on to hurt others. This occurring especially within the parent-child dynamic. That's the simplicity of a generational curse. It's a lack of overcoming. Speaking of generational curses, Exodus 20, verse 4. This is part of the 10 matters, the 10 commandments as it's called. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in the heaven above or that is in the earth beneath or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, Yah, your Elohim, am a jealousel, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. You know, this verse always gets brought up in light of Ezekiel. You know, that the children will not suffer for the parents' sake. And they go, well, what about this? You know, I always give this example. The example of adultery occurring within a marriage covenant with children. Does it only affect the parents, especially when there's a separation involved? Divorce, does it only affect the parents? No. The evidence is clear. It has a massive, massive impact on the children. Huge impact. Like the statistics for children that do not have a father figure in their life are alarming. Alarming. The chance, the likelihood of being incarcerated because you didn't have a father figure is ridiculously high. Adultery and then divorce affects the children. And if they're not given an opportunity to overcome, well, guess what? It passes on and it passes on. So my question is Elohim literally smiting the children? Well, no. It's actually the consequences of not having his ways in our lives. Look at the statement that this gets visited on those who hate him. You know when it says that life and death are in the commands? Blessings if you keep them, curses if you don't. This is actually baked into the creation. Elohim is not mocked. You will reap what you sow. If you do not apply biblical principles in your life, you will reap the fruit of it. And then that gets passed on down to the generations. But showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. If we have not his knowledge in the picture, but the knowledge and the wisdom of it. Look, my life is blessed. Why? Because I'm growing in the wisdom of Elohim's ways and knowing how to apply it. I have biblical order in my life. I reap the benefits of it. I reap the fruit of it. Here's what I find very interesting. Look at the context of generational curses. The context is in false gods and or creating Elohim in our own image. I'd never spotted that before. That literally the context, I've read this passage thousands of times. If you have a false god in your life, if you're putting something above the wisdom of Elohim in your life, or you're creating him in your own image, the covenant is promising you generational curses. Does the phrase, our fathers have inherited lies, now make more sense? This is why getting rid of the leaven in our lives spiritually is so important. Look around right now in the body. Look at the hurt that goes back generation after generation. You have secular so-called wisdom coming in, being put above the wisdom of Elohim. You have the so-called wisdom of Mystery Babylon that's polluting the religious world coming in. And then we wonder why everything's a mess. You know, when I thought of generational curses, I always thought of it in terms of overcoming, which is true. But I just, again, the context is creating Elohim in your own image. That's sobering. Towards the end of my rock bottom journey my rock bottom moment in life, I had a moment, like I said, I left home at 16. Actually, I was 15, but nearly 16. I left home. And those of you who know my testimony, for the next 2 years, I would go on to completely throw my life down the toilet to the point where I ended up as a borderline drug addict and alcoholic that was homeless, sofa surfing. That's how badly I self-destructed, because I was brought to a place where discipline provoked and angered me. And again, I didn't deal with it the way I ought to. I played my part, but hey ho, my life crashed and burned, and I hit this rock bottom moment in life. Now, bear in mind, I hadn't lost my faith in the Creator, but I was in the world, right? I was off doing my own thing. I remember making this commitment to myself. All of this, it stops with me. I had a moment at 18 where I was like, that's it, I'm done. I'm no longer going to play the victim, despite the fact that certain things that came my way were not my fault. I'm now make a decision here today, no more. If you want to hear more on that, go watch on the Olive Branch channel, part 3 of the Ecclesiastes series, where I go a bit more into that aspect of my testimony. But I remember making this commitment. That's it, I'm done. All this pain, all this hurt that has plagued my family for generation after generation, it stops with me. And I remember a year after that, or maybe I had a couple of moments in life where when I was processing the pain and the hurt, and I was overcoming the hurt from my father figures. I remember having this moment going, if I ever end up having children, they will never experience what I had to endure. And I meant that. I really meant it. And I turned my life around. The generational curse was broken with me. For that to become a reality, I had to overcome. Overcoming was non-negotiable. And boy, was it hard, because my overcoming journey actually began when I was still out of covenant. I was doing it from I don't want to say secular. Like I said, I never lost my belief in the Creator. I was very, that was set in me. But I made this, that's it, no more. And what I had to endure to come out of this miry clay of hitting rock bottom, it was brutal. It was hard. Lots of looking in the mirror, lots of taking accountability for my part to play in certain things, and actually coming to a place of no longer hating my father figures, but feeling sorrow for them. If you want to know how to break a generational curse, it's not, I plead the blood of Jesus over it. That's not the way to do it. If you want to break a generational curse in your life, you need to overcome. I'm sorry, it's the cold, hard truth. You need to overcome, and you need to get rid of the leaven in your life. Because again, generational curses, the context is creating him in our own image. Speaking of Babylon the Great, in Revelation 17, on her forehead was written a name of mystery. Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Yeshua. When I saw her, I marveled greatly. When people read this passage, they tend to only think of it within an end times context, like the Great Tribulation, and look at Mystery Babylon killing off all the saints and da-da-da-da-da. Mystery Babylon has been around for a very long time. And I say that almost facetiously. Go read Proverbs 7 of the adulterous woman and parallel it to Mystery Babylon. Look, spiritual seduction and the pollution of the faith has been around since the garden and the fall of man. It's always been there. It's always been there. Hence why she's the mother of prostitutes, the mother of them. This goes back right down to the fall of man. And I could even make the argument before. How is she killing the saints? The blood on her hands. Again, generational curses, pollute the faith, create Elohim in your own image, according to your vain imaginations, according to the traditions of what we've inherited from our fathers. All of that will end up breeding hurt, and that hurt will prevent you from knowing the love of Elohim, and it will keep you in a spiritually childlike state. What role did Mystery Babylon play in both of my earthly father figures' lives? As I said, I come from an Adventist background. Here's what I haven't said publicly before. My paternal father was training to be a pastor in the Adventist church when him and my mum met. Where I used to live in France was the main Adventist church where they had the place where they trained all the pastors for France and some of mainland Europe. That's where they met. My father was a pastor in training. My stepfather was also training to be a pastor on the English side of the Adventist church. But because of certain actions that he took in his early life, shall we say, not that it got denied him, but yeah. But he always sought to be in the upper echelons of the Adventist church, if we shall say. That's the role that Mystery Babylon played. in my earthly father's life and in my life. Mystery Babylon was busy at work. And so my earthly fathers, not only did they get it from the Mystery Babylon side, they also got it from the parental side. They got hit from both angles. The hurt. And then that passed on. And so again, going back to the idea of generational curses, how was I able to break the chain? I had to overcome on my hurt. I also had to overcome and get rid of Mystery Babylon in my life, a journey that we will all be doing while we're here on earth. That's how the chain was broken in my life. Get rid of the leaven, overcome. In the end, what did their biblical knowledge amount to, my earthly fathers? Mark my words, they were very biblically literate. In fact, like I've said in the past, as a child, I was very knowledgeable in the content of the Bible. And in somewhat, I owe a part of that to my stepfather. Definitely my mother as well. But what did their biblical knowledge amount to? When push came to shove, their family lives were a mess. Where was the faith becoming living in their lives? Oh, it looked good on Saturdays. Happy Sabbath. Look at the musical talent. Look at... My stepfather used to almost boast. I'd be like a trophy to show around. Look at how much my son knows of the Bible. He wins all the Bible quizzes. Meanwhile, he's literally giving me the backhander, literally, and to my mum, and to my brother, and to my... Really? What did their biblical... Again, knowledge is important, but knowledge has to come to wisdom, and wisdom has to become living if we're to be a witness. Where was the power of the Ruach in their lives? It was glaringly missing. In fact, it's part of the reason I rejected the faith. I didn't lose my belief in the Creator, but I rejected it. What were they entertaining spiritually that would allow the generational curse to pass on through them? Yes, they inherited the lies of their fathers, but what did they do about it with their lives? No one gets off the hook, including us. What are we entertaining that's preventing us from overcoming? Are we harboring on to hurt? Are we clinging on desperately to our leaven because it feeds ourself? Are we desperately hanging on to our religious fig leaves? Because all it's going to do is pass on hurt. Why couldn't they overcome? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that. I have a good idea. By the way, I don't hold it against them. All of this actually points to a weightier matter. Because again, going back to where this teaching began, these physical shadow pictures are given to us to understand the weightier matter. So today, my testimony has been more from the physical shadow picture side. But what's this all pointing to? We know that there is a groom, a bride, and there's going to be spiritual children. Curtis calls it the eternal family. There's going to be an eternal family. Do we view the body of Messiah with the same love that we do our own children? I'm aiming this one at the servant leaders who are parents. Primarily. Do we view the body this way? I'm not talking this emotional puppy love, right? I'm talking this deep bond. Because, unfortunately, if I'm going to be brutally honest, I'll tell you what I see from a lot of servant leaders. It's almost this mentality of, I love Messiah, Messiah loves these people, therefore it's in my best interest if I love what he loves. That's actually coming from a place of self. Think of the weightiest picture now as well of servant leaders hurting the children. Everything that we've gone through today from my testimony in this physical shadow picture, it's the fruit. All of that is going on spiritually. Go look in the body. A lot of you are here now because that's where you came from spiritually. You experienced the spiritual version of what I experienced physically. Some of you have experienced both. As I look at my son and as he grows, and I know that this is just the beginning of the journey, man, have I been forced to look in the mirror. And so I hope today I hope that my insights from early parenthood have been a blessing to you into the more practical aspect of our faith. I came from a faith-based background, and look at what I went through. A lot of you came from faith-based backgrounds, and look at what you've had to go through. All this hurt, all this pain. Are we going to be a community and a people where we go, that's it? It stops here. No more. No more. Because if that's the case, we have to overcome. And we have to get rid of the leaven in our lives so that we may finally begin to see what the love of Elohim really is, and that love may be perfected, that we may have confidence and boldness in the day of judgment. Amen.